My dear brothers and sisters, the political event across the world is simply a pointer to one thing, and that is that only change is permanent here on earth. Now, we're all witnesses to the political upheavals in West Africa, and in particular, Niger Republic. Now, we're all aware about the military takeover of governance in that country, and we're equally aware of the ultimatum given by the ECOWAS leadership. And now we're equally aware about the resistance that the ECOWAS leadership is facing from the military hierarchy in Niger Republic. Now, it's equally not news that the people of Niger Republic seem to be in support of the military takeover. Now, why are all these important? They are important because it's high time African leaders began to pay attention to the wishes and aspirations of the people. For too long, the people have been so impoverished by African politicians. For too long, our youth have been left at the mercy of the Western world. We see a lot of our youth perishing in the high seas in search of greener pastures. For too long, we've seen our politicians squander our resources, and if you like, the future of our youth. For too long, we've had African leaders steal our resources and take them away now. The irony of the whole nonsense is that here we are. Most African countries are heavily indebted to the Western nation. And so we go to the World Bank, we go to IMF, we go to different countries in the West, and we borrow money for development. We end up stealing that money and taking that money back to the Western countries. We stash them away, either to invest or to dump in the bank. And then the poor masses in Africa are made to pay interest on those funds that were actually meant for development, but they've been stolen. And at the end of the day, these same political leaders, if you like, give away the entire fortunes in terms of unverifiable agreements, bilateral agreements with these countries that are indeed so questionable. How do you explain you taking a loan from a country or any of the international organizations for, take for instance, construction of a bridge, right? Now, this project is meant to perhaps have an estimated cost of maybe $1 million, for instance. This is an inflated figure. You take up this loan, you end up constructing the bridge for maybe about 50% of the cost, because the moment the funds are in your coffers, you begin to cut corners. So the original costing is inflated to $1 million. You end up collecting the money, and then you bring down the standard of construction below what it was at the time you were collecting this loan. Because what happens is that all of these international agencies would require counterpart funding in a lot of the cases. And sometimes because the government does not have the resources to meet up with this counterpart funding, they begin to cut corners to ensure that, okay, something is put in place. The actual construction cost may not be more than $200,000 to $300,000. And then you pocket the rest. You take back the same money to the same country from where you collected the loan to invest. And a lot of times these political leaders, they die without anybody knowing they have these investments. Sometimes for the fear of being caught, they don't reveal the existence of these funds. And so when anything happens, let's say any of them is incarcerated, nobody gets to know. And so the subvention we pay for people in Western nations and other developed countries to live a comfortable life at the expense of our impoverished people is just so alarming. Because all those investments in those Western nations, at the end of the day, there are returns on investment. You pay taxes there, you create jobs. If you have a property in any country, of course, you are going to employ the services of people to take care of it. You pay property tax. Even if it's to mow your lawn, you have to pay someone. You are creating employment in other countries. And your own people are wallowing in abject poverty. Do we actually have conscience? Or is it a case of not having the sense, the brain to understand that what we are doing is ruining the future of our children and our children's children? So what is worse than getting into power through crooked means, buying your way through, subverting the wills of the people because you have stolen wealth to throw around? And then the military strikes, you think you have a moral justification to say the military must hand over to a democratically elected government. How many of our governments in Africa are actually democratically instituted? How many offices are occupied by people who actually won the elections? How many of our elections represent the wills of the people? And even when that happens, our politicians are very, very good at being the most humble individuals during campaigns. During electioneering campaigns, they will prostrate, they will make promises, they will be so humble, they will walk with the people, they will dine with the people. And then the moment they get up there, they become monsters overnight. So what's going on in Niger Republic is a follow-up to what happened in Nigeria during the 2023 elections, where the people came out, particularly the youth, to say it's time to take back our countries. And if the political leadership in Africa, if OAU, if the regional bodies like ECOWAS and so on and so forth are not paying attention, and you guys are not doing anything about it, I'm sorry for you, because the clock is ticking. How shameful is it for an African to go through pains to step into another African country? You have a situation where I saw the embarrassment one of the journalists from West Africa suffered in Southern Africa. And he had to be detained because he had a Ghanaian passport and he claimed to be Nigerian. And then, okay, because you said you're Nigerian, even though you have a Ghanaian passport, Nigerians are not allowed to come into this country visa-free. But he had a Ghanaian passport that gave him visa-free entry into your country. And we are so shameless in defending the actions of our immigration officers in the way and manner we treat our fellow Africans. But an American, an European, can freely come into your country for 90 days visa-free. But another African cannot come into your country. Who did this to us? So they came, they colonized us, they divided us in regions, more like you have a large expanse of land, and then you come, you divide it, and you say, you cultivate here, you cultivate there. And the lands belong to us, our ancestors. They divided us among the English-speaking and French-speaking parts, and in some cases, Portuguese. We accepted all that, and they left, and they have continued to divide us, and our political leaders have continued to foolishly toe the same line. And so someone tells you that because you're a South African, you cannot come into Ghana, for instance, or you cannot come into Nigeria, for instance, without a visa. And you accept that. You cannot get into Cameroon without a visa. But an American can get into Cameroon without a visa. But a Cameroonian cannot get into America without a visa. And that's how foolish we are. An American can travel to South Africa for tourism without a visa. But a South African needs a visa to visit the United States. And so on and so forth. And we are shamelessly carrying out these orders, like our fellow African brothers and sisters have some, I don't know what to say. I don't want to use certain words I'm not supposed to use on television. But this is a reflection. African Union, this is time to sit up. You must stop being puppets to the West. If you are not going to interact with other countries as equals, give way for the younger ones who understand the current day politics to get into power, because you have failed. You have not provided any form of mentorship for the younger ones, because if the younger ones were to learn from you, the stealing and ineptitude will continue. And if you've not realized that you have failed, shame on you. So African leaders, you need to wake up before it is too late. Retrace your steps. Go back to the drawing board. No African should require a visa to visit another African country. That's number one. Point number two. No African in diaspora, particularly descendants of slaves, should be made to go through pains and emotional torture again to step their foot on the lands of their ancestors. They've already suffered enough pains because their ancestors were sold into slavery by their own brothers and sisters. Yes, in some cases they were forcefully taken, but in some other cases, those slave trade were actually aided and abated by our own African brothers and sisters for economic gains. I'm going to end this reflection here, and I want to believe that some of the things I have said would get into the skulls of some of our African leaders. A word is enough for the wise. My name is Martin Sobu, and once again, it's my pleasure being with you today. I'll see you again.